All right, let's talk about a story that, honestly, sounds like it's straight out of a movie. It's about how one wrong turn, a car that just happened to stall, and a single lucky, or maybe unlucky shot completely redrew the map of the world as we know it. We're diving deep into the Great War, what we now call World War I.
I mean, just think about that for a second. We're talking about a conflict that cost millions upon millions of lives, toppled 4 massive empires, and yet it all kicked off with an unbelievable, almost comical fluke. So the big question is, how on earth did one driver's simple mistake manage to ignite a full-blown global catastrophe?
Okay, so just look at this timeline. It's insane, really. It shows you just how fast everything completely unraveled. You go from one assassination on June 28 to basically all of Europe's major powers at each other's throats by the beginning of August. We're talking 37 days. That's it. In a little over a month, a local crisis just exploded into this continental inferno. Diplomacy didn't just fail here. It basically evaporated overnight.
So let's really zoom in on where it all started. It begins on the streets of a single city with a story that, I'm telling you, feels way too cinematic to be real.
Okay, picture this. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the whole Austro-Hungarian throne, is in Sarajevo. He'd already survived one attempt on his life that morning. A grenade literally bounced off his car. So he decides to visit the people who were injured in that attack at the hospital. But his driver takes a wrong turn, and as the car stalls while trying to back up, it just happens to stop right in front of Gavrilo Princip. This was one of the assassins, a young Serbian nationalist who had basically given up for the day and was grabbing a sandwich. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He sees his chance, fires 2 shots, and boom, history is changed forever.
But here's the thing. That one shot, as dramatic as it was really just the spark. The reason it ignited such a massive fire is because it landed in what everyone at the time called the powder keg of Europe. This whole Balkan region was just a tinderbox of competing empires, ancient rivalries, and this really intense new wave of nationalism. Austria-Hungary, for its part, was desperate to crush Serbian nationalism, and well, this assassination handed them the perfect excuse on a silver platter.
So, that's the big question, right? How does the murder of one guy, even an important one, drag the entire world into a war? Well, it all came down to this incredibly tangled web of promises. A whole system of alliances that was, ironically, designed to keep the peace, but instead, it pretty much guaranteed a catastrophe.
So before the war, Europe had basically split itself into 2 big armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's France, the UK, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And these weren't just, friendly handshakes. No, these were serious military pacts that created a hair-trigger tripwire for a massive war.
And this is where you can literally watch the dominoes fall, one after the other. It's a crazy chain reaction. First, Austria-Hungary gets what's called a blank check of total support from Germany, so they declare war on Serbia. Then Russia, who sees itself as the big protector of Serbia, starts mobilizing its huge army. Germany sees that mobilization as a direct threat, so it declares war on Russia, and on Russia's ally, France. Now, to get to France quickly, Germany invades neutral Belgium, and that's the final domino. It triggers Britain's treaty to protect Belgium, and suddenly, they're in it too. Just like that, in a matter of days, it's an all-out European war.
And the crazy thing is, everyone thought this would be over in a few weeks. The famous line was that the soldiers would be home by Christmas. Boy, were they wrong. Instead, what they got was something completely new and completely horrific. A grinding war of attrition, fought on an industrial scale.
So Germany's big strategy was called the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was simple, at least on paper. Knock France out of the war fast, like in 6 weeks, before Russia could get its massive army ready to fight. But it didn't work. They were stopped just short of Paris at the Battle of the Marne. And after that, everything changed. Both sides dug in, literally. They built trenches to protect themselves, and that created the Western Front, a static, brutal, unbroken line of mud, barbed wire, and death stretching from the Swiss border all the way to the sea.
And what made this stalemate so incredibly deadly was this awful mismatch between old tactics and new technology. I mean, you had generals with 19th century mindsets ordering cavalry charges straight into 20th century machine guns. It was suicide. And then came even newer horrors: poison gas, heavy artillery, and eventually the first tanks. It was just industrial-scale slaughter.
This famous phrase,
"They shall not pass" became the rallying cry for the French during the hellish Battle of Verdun in 1916. It perfectly captures the grim reality of this war. It wasn't about glorious victories or sweeping advances anymore. It was about holding a patch of muddy ground no matter the cost. Victory was measured in inches, not miles. And just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of the human cost, let's stick with Verdun. In that one battle alone, there were nearly 1 million casualties. 1 million. That's killed and wounded. All for a tiny, obliterated patch of scorched earth. And the most horrifying part? Verdun was just one of many, many brutal battles just like it.
All right, so this wasn't just a European conflict stuck in the trenches of France and Belgium. Oh no, it quickly exploded to become the first truly world war.
You have to remember, these weren't just countries, they were massive global empires. So when Britain and France went to war, they brought their entire empires with them. You had soldiers from India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and all across Africa fighting and dying for the Allies. And then the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, which opened up a whole new set of fronts in the Middle East. Yeah, the fighting was raging absolutely everywhere. You had these brutal, bloody beach landings at Gallipoli in Turkey. There was a grueling, frozen war fought high up in the Italian Alps. And there were even clashes in the jungles of Africa and on remote islands in Asia. It was happening all over the globe.
Now, for the first 3 years, the big player on the sidelines was the United States. They were officially neutral. But Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, which basically meant their U-boats would sink any ship heading to Britain, changed everything. The sinking of the passenger liner Lusitania back in 1915, which killed over 100 Americans, really angered the public. When Germany doubled down on that policy in 1917, that was the last straw. The U.S. declared war, and that tipped the scales decisively in favor of the Allies.
So by 1918, it was all coming to an end. Fresh American troops were pouring into France, Germany's allies were collapsing one by one, and Germany itself was defeated. But the end of the fighting, that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot, because the peace that came next would end up shaping the entire rest of the 20th century.
At the end of the war, you had these two totally conflicting visions for what peace should look like. On one hand, you had the American president Woodrow Wilson. He was an idealist pushing for a peace without victory. But on the other hand, you had the European allies, especially France, who had bled for 4 years, and frankly, they wanted revenge. Guess who won that argument? The result was the Treaty of Versailles, which basically pinned all the blame on Germany and slapped them with crippling financial reparations.
And the final price tag for the Great War, it's almost impossible to comprehend. We're talking somewhere around 40 million total casualties. And politically, 4 massive ancient empires, the Russian, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, and the Ottoman, were just gone, wiped off the map. A world order that had stood for centuries had completely vanished.
The legacy of this war was just total transformation. It literally remade the world. New countries like Poland and Yugoslavia were born from the ashes of those fallen empires. The United States stepped onto the stage as a real global power. But the war also left behind this deeply scarred, lost generation of survivors. And tragically, the massive movement of troops around the globe helped spread the 1918 Spanish flu, which became the deadliest pandemic in modern history.
And all of that brings us to one final chilling question. That peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, was so harsh and created so much bitterness and resentment in Germany that many historians now argue it made a Second World War pretty much inevitable. So, did the war to end all wars actually achieve anything, or was it, in the end, just a 20-year truce?